In the late 1960s, a shadow fell over Northern California, an unseen presence that seemed to move without pattern, without warning, and without remorse. This presence would become known as the Zodiac Killer, one of the most infamous and elusive criminals in modern history, unlike many killers before him. The Zodiac did not simply commit his crimes and disappear into obscurity. Instead, he reached out taunting authorities, manipulating the media, and crafting an identity that would haunt investigators and the public for decades. The terror began quietly. On December 20th, 1968, near Lake Herman Road, a young couple, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, were shot while parked in a secluded area. At first, it appeared to be a tragic but isolated act of violence. There were no immediate signs that this crime would mark the beginning of a series. But less than a year later, on July 4th, 1969, another attack occurred at Blue Rock Springs Park. This time, the victims were Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mago. Ferrin died from her injuries, but Mago survived and provided a description of the attacker, though it was vague and offered little help in identifying the man responsible. What made this second attack different was what followed. Shortly after the shooting, a man called the Vallejo Police Department, calmly reporting the crime and taking responsibility not only for the recent attack, but also for the earlier murders at Lake Herman Road. The caller spoke in a measured tone, almost detached, as if describing something trivial. This chilling communication marked the beginning of a new phase one in which the killer sought recognition and control through direct interaction with authorities and the public. In August 1969, several newspapers, including the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald, received letters from someone claiming to be the killer. Each letter contained a portion of a cryptogram, a coded message made up of strange symbols and characters. The writer demanded that the letters be published on the front page, threatening further violence if his demands were not met. The newspapers complied. Amateur codebreakers and curious citizens quickly turned their attention to the cryptograms. Within days, a high school teacher and his wife managed to decipher one of them. It was not just a confession, it was a manifesto of cruelty, one that transformed the killer into something more than a criminal. He became a symbol of fear, someone who seemed to revel in the attention and chaos he created. It was in a subsequent letter that the killer first referred to himself as Zodiac. He included a symbol, a circle crossed by the lines, resembling a gun sight that would become his signature. This symbol appeared in later communications and became synonymous with the case itself. The Zodiac had effectively branded his crimes, turning them into a dark narrative that the public could follow, even as authorities struggled to stop him. The attacks continued. On September 27, 1969, at Lake Berryessa, a couple named Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were picnicking when a man approached them wearing an executioner-style hood marked with the Zodiac symbol. Unlike previous attacks, this one involved a knife. The assailant bound the victims before stabbing them multiple times. Shepard later died from her injuries, while Hartnell survived and provided a detailed account of the encounter. The attacker even wrote a message on the victim's car door, listing previous murders and including the now familiar Zodiac symbol. Just weeks later, on October 11, 1969, the Zodiac struck again, this time in the city. A taxi driver named Paul Stein was shot in the head in the Presidio Heights neighborhood of San Francisco. This murder differed from the earlier attacks in both location and method, suggesting that the killer was unpredictable and willing to change his approach. Witnesses saw a man leaving the scene, and a police radio error reportedly led officers to search for a black suspect instead of a white one, allowing the Zodiac to escape. Following the Stein murder, the Zodiac's letters became even more frequent and increasingly bizarre. He sent pieces of Stein's blood-stained shirt to newspapers as proof of his involvement. He wrote about plans to target school buses, describing in detail how he might carry out such an attack. Whether these threats were genuine or intended purely to instill fear remains unclear, but they succeeded in spreading panic throughout the region. One of the most enduring mysteries of the case lies in the Zodiac ciphers. While some of his coded messages have been solved, Others remain undeciphered to this day. These cryptograms have attracted the attention of professional cryptographers, amateur enthusiasts, and even computer scientists, all attempting to unlock their secrets. The complexity of the codes and the possibility that they may contain clues to the killer's identity has kept interest in the case alive for decades. Despite extensive investigations involving multiple law enforcement agencies, the Zodiac Killer was never identified. Thousands of suspects were considered over the years, including individuals with criminal backgrounds, military experience, or connections to the crime scenes. One of the most prominent suspects was Arthur Lee Allen, but evidence against him was ultimately inconclusive. DNA testing, handwriting analysis, and fingerprint comparisons failed to produce a definitive match. The case grew colder with time, but it never disappeared. In fact, the legend of the Zodiac Killer only expanded. Books, documentaries, and films have explored the mystery, each offering new theories and interpretations. One of the most notable portrayals came in the film Zodiac, directed by David Fincher, which presented a detailed and methodical account of the investigation and the obsession it inspired. What sets the Zodiac Killer apart from other serial criminals is not just the brutality of his actions, but the way he manipulated perception. He understood the power of media and used it to amplify his presence. By communicating directly with newspapers and police, he inserted himself into the narrative, ensuring that his crimes would not be forgotten. He turned fear into a form of currency, one that allowed him to control the conversation even in his absence. The psychological impact of the Zodiac's actions cannot be overstated. For residents of Northern California during that time, everyday activities going on a date, driving at night, sitting in a parked car became sources of anxiety. The idea that a killer could strike anywhere, at any time, created a pervasive sense of vulnerability. And because the Zodiac was never caught, that fear never fully dissipated. In recent years, advances in forensic technology have renewed interest in the case. DNA analysis, in particular, has provided new avenues for investigation. Some researchers have attempted to extract genetic material from the Zodiac's letters and compare it to modern databases. While these efforts have yielded potential leads, none have resulted in a confirmed identification. The possibility remains that the killer's identity may still be uncovered, but as time passes, that prospect becomes increasingly uncertain. The Zodiac Killer remains a paradox of figure both known and unknown. His words are preserved, his symbols recognized, his crimes documented in detail. Yet his face, his name, and his true identity remain hidden. This duality is what continues to captivate the public imagination. He is not just a criminal case. He is a mystery that resists resolution. More than half a century later, the question still lingers: who was the Zodiac Killer? Was he a lone individual driven by a desire for power and recognition? Or was there something more complex behind his actions? Without definitive answers, the case exists in a space between history and legend where facts and speculation intertwine. And perhaps that is the most unsettling aspect of all, not just that the Zodiac Killer was never caught, but that he succeeded in creating something that endures, a story without an ending, a voice without a face, a shadow that, even now, refuses to fade.